Okay, so look, I messed up. I didn't think I was messing up at the time, but that's how these things always go, right? You look back, and suddenly every moment that seemed harmless, even funny, turns into a bright red warning sign. It started in the kitchen. I remember because I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone while waiting for the water to boil. Daniel was sitting at the table, flipping through some work papers, barely looking up. It was one of those quiet nights where everything felt routine, normal, too normal. And then I said it. I don't know what even made me say it. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was just one of those stupid little thoughts that pop into your head and slip out before you can catch them. But I did. I looked up, let out a small laugh, and said, maybe I should just get a boyfriend. Spice things up. It wasn't serious. It wasn't real. It was the kind of throwaway joke that couples make when they're teasing each other, when they're secure enough that words don't hold weight. Except this time it did, because Daniel didn't react, not in the way I expected at least. No sharp inhale, no narrowing of his eyes, no immediate rebuttal. He didn't even look surprised. He just turned the page in his stupid work folder and said, okay. Like I had just told him I was going to the store. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter, I laughed, trying to brush off the uncomfortable twist in my stomach. Wow, no fight, no please baby, don't leave me for some stranger. He just gave this little shrug. You do what you want, Mia. And that was it. I should have left it alone. Should have let it slide. Should have chalked it up to him being tired or distracted or just not in the mood for my nonsense. But something in his tone, in that unbearable indifference, lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I couldn't ignore. So I pushed. Wait, seriously, that's all you have to say. If I said I wanted to leave, you'd just let me. He glanced at me then, finally, but his expression was unreadable. Would you want me to stop you? The way he said it, flat, effortless, sent a cold shiver through me. It should have been a joke. I should have laughed, should have rolled my eyes and told him he was being ridiculous. But I couldn't. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was the one who started this, or if I was just the last one to realize it had already begun. I turned away, stirring my tea for no reason at all, my heartbeat thrumming too loud in my ears. The room felt different now, like something invisible had cracked between us. And the worst part, I had no idea if I was the one who cracked it. I didn't say anything else that night. Neither did he. But I could feel it, a shift, a quiet, undeniable change. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him sitting there, that unreadable look on his face, that casual, careless shrug. You do what you want, Mia. Like I was some obligation he had grown tired of. Like I was already halfway out the door and he was just waiting for me to notice. At some point in the night, I turned over and watched him sleep. He looked peaceful, unbothered. His breathing was steady, deep, like someone with nothing on his mind. Meanwhile, I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. I used to love watching him sleep. In the early days, I'd trace the lines of his face with my eyes, memorize every little detail, the way his lashes would flicker in dreams, the slight crease between his brows. I'd rest my head on his chest just to hear his heartbeat, just to know he was there. But now, all I could do was stare and wonder if I even knew him anymore, if he even cared. The next morning, I woke up before him. The sun was just barely creeping through the blinds, washing the room in pale gold. I lay there for a while, willing myself to feel normal, to shake off whatever this was. But when he finally stirred, stretching with a quiet sigh, the first thing I felt was distance, not the physical kind, something deeper. Like there was this vast, invisible space between us that I hadn't noticed before, and now I couldn't unsee it. He got up, rubbing a hand over his face, and mumbled a groggy, "Morning." I waited, hoping for something, some look, some touch, some proof that last night hadn't changed anything. But he just walked into the bathroom, like nothing was wrong. Like I was the only one who felt it. By the time he came out, dressed for the day, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this fester. I wasn't going to sit in silence, dissecting every glance, every pause, until I drove myself insane. So, as he grabbed his keys and reached for his coffee, I blurted it out. "Do you even care if I leave?" The words dropped between us, heavy, final. He paused, fingers curling around the coffee cup, but he didn't look at me. Then, after a long moment, he said, "Would it change anything if I did?" A slow, suffocating silence filled the room. I felt my breath hitch, my stomach drop, my entire body go still. That wasn't a yes. It wasn't even a no. It was worse. It was a mirror, reflecting back at me a question I wasn't ready to answer. I should have had something to say. A sharp reply, a demand for clarity, a reason to push him into giving me the reaction I wanted. But my throat felt tight, my mouth dry, and all I could do was stare at him like I had never seen him before. Would it change anything? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that if he just fought for me, if he just showed me something, anything, then I wouldn't be standing here feeling like I was disappearing right in front of him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just took a sip of his coffee like we were talking about the weather. Like my entire world wasn't tilting under my feet, and then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. I don't even remember stepping forward, but suddenly I was right there, standing in his way, searching his face for something, anger, hurt, regret. Anything to tell me that this wasn't just nothing. "Daniel," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. He stopped but didn't look at me right away. His expression wasn't cold, wasn't cruel, just calm, resigned. I hated it. "I need to know," I pressed, my hands curling into fists. "If I walked out of here today, would you stop me?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze finally meeting mine. And for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something flicker there, something raw, something real. But it was gone before I could hold on to it. "If you really wanted to leave, Mia," he said, voice steady, "then I wouldn't be able to stop you." I felt my breath catch. He didn't say he wouldn't want to, he said he wouldn't be able to. There's a difference, isn't there? There has to be. I opened my mouth, ready to argue, ready to tell him that this wasn't about logistics, that I needed to hear something else, something more. But he just leaned forward, pressed a chaste kiss to my forehead, like a habit, like a memory, and stepped around me. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and I just stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been, my heart pounding in my ears. I had wanted an answer. I had wanted a reaction. But now that I had one, I wasn't sure I was ready for what it meant. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together. My body was still, but my mind was a chaotic mess, spinning in circles, trying to make sense of everything. It wasn't just the words he said that hit me. It was the complete lack of anything else. No anger, no desperation, no pleading for me to stay. Just this hollow, unfeeling truth. I kept running the conversation over in my head, trying to find something that could explain it. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he had a bad day. Maybe. But the truth gnawed at me. He wasn't even trying. I pulled myself together enough to finish getting ready. There was no way I was staying in the apartment, stewing in my own thoughts. I needed space. I needed something to distract me from the overwhelming heaviness sitting in my chest. So I went out. Took a walk, grabbed some coffee, lost myself in the crowd of people who had no idea what was unraveling inside me. It didn't help. Nothing helped. By the time I came back, Daniel was already home. The apartment was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that felt like it was filled with too many unsaid things. He was in the living room, his back turned to me as he flipped through some papers, his usual calm demeanor in place. And yet, I could feel the distance. I could feel it stretching further, like it was slowly swallowing up everything we had. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to confront him again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. So I sat on the edge of the couch, watching him for a moment before speaking. "Do you even care that I'm still here?" It was a stupid question, a question that already had an answer, but I asked it anyway, desperate for something I couldn't name. He didn't look up at first, and I hated that he didn't. But then he set the papers down and turned toward me, his eyes soft but guarded. "I do, Mia," he said, the words almost too gentle. "But I can't keep fighting if you're the one who's checked out." His voice was quiet, but it was like the world shifted on its axis when he said it. I felt my stomach lurch. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to hear it. And yet, it was the thing I had been fearing, the thing I had been trying to avoid. I was the one who was checked out. I had been for a while. I didn't know how to fix that. I didn't even know if I wanted to. "I don't know what you want from me, Daniel," I said, the frustration creeping into my voice. I'm not asking you to beg. I'm not asking for some grand gesture. I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. How could I put into words the mess I was feeling inside? The guilt, the need, the longing for something that I couldn't define. Just what, Mia? He asked, his tone softer now, but his eyes still searching mine. I don't know, I whispered, defeated. I don't know anymore. The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in a long while, I realized how alone we both were in this space. We weren't communicating anymore. We weren't fighting, we weren't loving, we were just existing. And I didn't know how to get out of this quiet, suffocating void we had built around us. I spent the next few hours pretending everything was fine, as if I could somehow convince myself that I hadn't just cracked open a door to something I wasn't ready to see. I tried to go about my day like normal, made dinner, watched a bit of TV, talked about the weather. But all the while, there was this looming, suffocating question hanging in the back of my mind. What now? Daniel wasn't acting like anything had changed. He was still calm, still present, but it was like I was watching him through a thick pane of glass. There was this clear divide between us that I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. At some point, I found myself standing in the kitchen, washing dishes, my hands automatically scrubbing away at the plate in front of me. My mind was elsewhere, on everything and nothing. And that's when it hit me like a sudden gust of wind. What if this was it? What if he was just done? I'd spent so much time trying to test him, to get a reaction out of him, that I hadn't even stopped to think about what he might be feeling. Maybe he was tired of trying to figure me out. Tired of feeling like I was always on the edge, always looking for something more that he couldn't give me. My chest tightened at the thought. I didn't want to face it, but deep down I knew the truth. I had pushed him away. Little by little, without realizing it, I had done it. I had always craved excitement, drama, validation, and I didn't even notice when it started to suffocate him. But what could I do now? Could I just act like nothing had changed? Could I go back to pretending we were fine? I felt the cold weight of regret settling in, pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Every choice I had made since that damn joke, every glance I had thrown his way, every word I had said, had only made things worse. And still, I didn't know how to stop it. I was so caught up in my own mess that I couldn't see how much I was hurting him, how much I was hurting myself. The hardest part was knowing I couldn't undo it. I couldn't go back to the way things were before I let all of this start. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands dry on a towel, and turned toward the living room. Daniel was sitting on the couch, flipping through his phone, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Daniel," I said, my voice low and hesitant, "we need to talk." He didn't immediately look up, but he set his phone down, his gaze meeting mine with that same calm, distant expression he had been wearing all day. It was like he already knew what I was about to say. "I messed up," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I didn't mean to, but I pushed you. And I don't know when or how, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of what we had, and I'm sorry." He didn't speak for a long moment, and I hated the silence between us, the distance. It felt like miles. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "Mia, I'm not the one who's checked out." His voice was quiet, but there was something in it, a weight of truth I couldn't ignore. "You've been pulling away for a while. You've been testing me, trying to make me prove something to you, and I can't keep doing that." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I had been so focused on making him prove his love, his commitment, that I didn't even see how much I was pushing him away. I opened my mouth to say something, to explain, to beg for another chance, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, looking at him, really looking at him, for the first time in so long. And I realized something. Maybe we were both too far gone to fix it. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel the weight of his words pressing on me, each one sinking deeper, making it harder to breathe. He wasn't angry, but there was something colder in his eyes now, something that felt like acceptance. Acceptance of the fact that I had let this go too far. I wanted to speak, to fix it, but I didn't know how. How could I? All I had done for the past few weeks, months even, was try to provoke him, try to get a reaction, try to get him to care in a way I didn't fully understand. I wasn't testing him. I was testing myself, trying to force myself to feel something, anything, that would make me believe we were okay. But now I could see the cracks. I could see the damage I had caused and I couldn't take it back. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize I was pushing you away until it was too late. He didn't respond immediately, but his gaze softened just a little, the hardness in his eyes easing, though it didn't completely disappear. It was like he was still holding back something, some final piece of him that had already pulled away, that had already started shutting down. I know you didn't, he said, his voice low but steady. But Mia, you've been doing this for a while now. You keep looking for something outside of us, and I don't know how to keep up with that. I could feel my chest tightening, like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth. He was right. I had been looking for something outside of us, something to fill the empty spaces inside me that I couldn't even understand. And in doing that, I had lost sight of everything I was supposed to care about. I never meant for you to feel like that, I said, my throat tight, my heart racing. I wanted to feel wanted, to feel something, I guess. And when you didn't react the way I expected, it made me question everything. But I can see now, I can see how wrong I was. He didn't say anything for a long time. His eyes were on me, but his expression was unreadable. He didn't look angry, but there was this quiet sadness in him that I couldn't ignore. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were, he said, his voice softer now, but still firm. I don't know if I can keep putting in the effort when it feels like you're already gone. I can't keep fighting for us if you're the one who's not here anymore. And that was the hardest part. I didn't know if I was still here. I didn't know if I could be. The truth was, I had been so wrapped up in my own insecurities, in my own fears, that I had failed to notice the toll it was taking on him. I had wanted to test him, to make him prove something to me that I didn't even understand myself. And in doing that, I had pushed him away. I don't know what I want anymore, I said, the tears finally starting to slip down my face. I just know I don't want to lose you, but I think I've already lost you. The words felt like a confession, like a surrender. I didn't know where we went from here, or if we could even come back from this. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Daniel. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me like he was weighing something in his mind. I wanted him to say it was okay, that we could fix it, that this was just a bump in the road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Me too, he said finally, his voice tight, his eyes not quite meeting mine. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. And in that moment, I understood. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. It never had been. The room felt colder after that, even though the heating was on, even though the evening sun was still spilling in through the window. I could feel the space between us, widening, expanding until it felt like we were on opposite sides of some invisible chasm that neither of us could cross. It was like all the words we hadn't said, the things we had both kept buried, had finally surfaced, and now there was no going back. I don't know how much time passed after that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. We both sat there, not looking at each other, not saying anything, just letting the silence settle around us like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I should have left. I should have walked out of the apartment, given myself space to breathe, to think. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Because leaving him would be like admitting that everything we had built, everything we had worked for, was crumbling, and I wasn't ready to face that. I wasn't ready to see the pieces fall apart, not when I still wasn't sure what I had done wrong. Finally, he stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was giving me one last chance to say something, to change things before they went too far. But I couldn't speak. The words were stuck in my throat, tangled up with all the guilt, the fear, the shame that had been building inside me for so long. He turned away from me, heading for the door, and that's when I felt it, the finality of it all. He wasn't coming back, not in the way I wanted him to anyway. Daniel, I said, my voice trembling barely above a whisper. Please don't go. He paused, his hand on the door, but he didn't turn around. I'm not leaving because I want to, he said quietly, almost to himself. I'm leaving because I don't know how to stay anymore. I don't know how to fix this. I could hear the resignation in his voice, the weight of his own uncertainty, and it broke something inside me. Because I realized for the first time that this wasn't just my fault. It was both of us. We had both been too afraid to confront the truth, too afraid to admit that we were losing each other. I'm sorry, I whispered again, but this time it felt like the words didn't mean anything anymore. It was too late for sorry. He left without saying anything else, and I was alone in the quiet, empty apartment. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. What could I do next? And that's when it hit me. I had spent so long trying to make him prove something to me, to get him to fight for me, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I was doing to myself. I had been so caught up in this cycle of doubt, of insecurity, that I had pushed him away without even realizing it. I had wanted him to react, to show me he cared, but I hadn't stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, he had already been doing that in his own way, and I had ignored it. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, trying to piece everything together. But when I finally stood up, I felt different. I felt like something inside me had shifted, like I had finally seen the truth of what I had done, and I wasn't sure I could take it back. But one thing was clear. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Not without at least trying to fix what I had broken. I didn't know if it was too late, but I knew I had to at least try. The question was, though, could I fix it? Would he even want me to? I didn't know, but I wasn't giving up yet. Not completely. I spent the next few days in a kind of fog, going through the motions but not really being present for any of it. I worked, ate, slept, but it all felt like a dream, distant, blurry, detached from anything real. Every time I thought about Daniel, about what we had said, the weight of it all would settle back in, making it hard to breathe. I tried to keep myself busy, but there was no escaping the truth that was gnawing at me. He was gone. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. And I had no idea how to get him back. The apartment felt emptier than ever. Every corner, every room seemed to echo with the quiet space he had left behind. There was no one to talk to. No one to ask if what I was feeling was normal, if I was just being dramatic, or if this was really the end. I went out a couple of times, met up with a friend for coffee just to fill the silence, but it didn't help. I was only more aware of how much I missed him, how much I missed us. I didn't reach out to him. I knew that would be a mistake. I had done enough pushing already, enough testing. He had made it clear that he wasn't going to chase me anymore, and I didn't know if I could bear to have him tell me again that he couldn't keep trying when it felt like I was the one who wasn't there. But it wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about what he could or couldn't give me. It was about me, about the choices I had made, the mistakes I had let slide, and the things I had taken for granted. I hadn't been present either. I hadn't been paying attention. I had been so caught up in my own insecurities, in my own fears, that I had stopped noticing him, stopped noticing the way he had been trying even when I wasn't. One night, after another long, empty day, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. I hadn't texted him, hadn't called. I couldn't, but that didn't stop me from looking at his name in my contacts, seeing it there, like a reminder of everything I had lost. I took a deep breath and typed out a message, hesitating for a moment before hitting send. I know I've messed up. I don't know if I can fix it, but I'm willing to try. If you want to talk, I'm here. It wasn't much. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't an apology that could undo everything, but it was the truth. I had to say it, even if it was too late. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for a response that didn't come. The seconds turned into minutes, then into an hour. No reply. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe he wouldn't respond. Maybe I had already burned that bridge. But I had said it. I had put myself out there in a way I hadn't before, and in some strange way that was enough. It had to be. The next morning I woke up to the usual quiet. But this time it wasn't just emptiness. It felt like there was space, room for something new to happen. Whether that was with Daniel or without him, I didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't sure what the future held, whether I would ever get a chance to fix things with him. But one thing was clear. I had to change. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. I had to figure out what I wanted, what I needed, without trying to force someone else to fill that space. As I stood up and got ready for the day, I knew I wasn't the same person I was before. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward fixing everything else. Days passed, and each one felt like a slow crawl toward something I couldn't quite define. I kept waiting for Daniel to reach out, to respond to my message, but he didn't. There were no calls, no texts, no signs that he was willing to try. And as much as it hurt, I realized I wasn't sure what I was even hoping for anymore. What if the space between us had grown too wide? What if the damage was irreversible? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost him. Not in the way you lose someone physically, but in the way you lose them emotionally, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to hold on to. And I was terrified that I was the one who had done it. I spent some time reflecting on everything, the way I had pushed him, the way I had tested him, looking for signs that I mattered. I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I had made him feel invisible. The more I tried to force him into these reactions, these moments of proof, the further he had pulled away. And I couldn't blame him for that. He had stopped fighting because, at some point, I had stopped showing up for us. But even as I reflected on my mistakes, I couldn't deny the emptiness I felt without him. It wasn't just about missing him. His presence, his voice, the way we used to share those small, intimate moments. It was about missing the person I used to be when I was with him. I had always thought that he was the one who needed to change, that he was the one who needed to fight harder. But now, looking back, I saw how much I had been running away from my own responsibilities. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe this wasn't just about me fixing things with him. Maybe this was about me fixing myself. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. I needed to understand why I had acted the way I had, why I had let myself get so lost in this cycle of needing more, needing him to prove that he wanted me. I had been so focused on the idea of us, of what we were supposed to be, that I had forgotten to ask myself who I was and what I needed without him. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how to fix things with Daniel or if I ever would. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to figure out who I was outside of this relationship, outside of this mess I had created. One evening, after another quiet, uneventful day, I decided to go for a walk. The air was crisp, the sky just beginning to darken with the promise of night. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of my own head, away from the weight of my thoughts. As I walked, I found myself thinking about the future. Not just about what might happen with Daniel, but about what I wanted for myself. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into the mold of what I thought a relationship was supposed to be, what I thought love was supposed to look like. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe love wasn't supposed to be about tests, about proving your worth. Maybe it was about being with someone who made you feel whole, who accepted you for who you were, not for what you could give them in return. And if that wasn't Daniel anymore, then maybe it was time to let him go. Not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't working. Not if it meant losing myself in the process. By the time I made it back home, the decision wasn't clearer, but the weight in my chest had lightened just a little. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything, but it was a beginning to something new. Whether that was with Daniel or without him, I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I still didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing. I had to start living for me. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way I could ever find my way back to us, if there was anything left to return to. I didn't know if Daniel would ever reach out. I didn't know if he even cared to anymore. But as I sat down on the couch that night, I realized that I was no longer waiting for him to decide my fate. I was deciding it for myself, and that, for now, was enough.